The marriage certificate felt heavy in my trembling hands as I stared at the signature I'd just written, Victoria Hayes-Blackwood. The name looked foreign, like it belonged to someone else entirely. 24 hours ago, I was Victoria Hayes, struggling art restoration graduate drowning in student debt and betrayal. Now I was the wife of a man I'd met exactly 3 times, holding a check for $50,000 that would solve every financial problem I'd ever had. The Gothic mansion loomed around me, its shadows seeming to whisper secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. What had I done? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months earlier, my life looked picture perfect from the outside. I was living in a cozy Portland apartment with David Chen, my boyfriend of 3 years, working part-time at the Portland Art Museum while finishing my master's degree in art restoration. David was a rising star at a tech startup, charming and ambitious, with plans that always seemed to include me in supporting roles. We talked about marriage, about the future, about the life we'd build together once I graduated and found stable work in my field. The morning everything shattered started like any other. I was hunched over my laptop at our small kitchen table, frantically working on my thesis about 19th century oil painting preservation techniques. The deadline loomed just 2 weeks away, and I'd been pulling all-nighters for months to balance my research with work and relationship demands. David had been increasingly distant lately, citing stress from a potential promotion, but I'd attributed it to normal career pressures. My phone buzzed with a text from my thesis advisor. "Victoria, we need to discuss your funding situation urgently. Can you come in today?" My stomach dropped. The research grant that covered my final semester was already stretched thin, and I'd been living on ramen and hope for weeks. Any financial complication could derail everything I'd worked toward for the past 4 years. I padded to the bedroom to tell David about the meeting, but he wasn't there. His side of the bed was cold, untouched. Confused, I checked the bathroom, then the living room. His laptop was gone, along with the expensive coffee maker his parents had given us. A chill crept up my spine as I noticed other missing items: his favorite books, the vintage camera he never traveled without, the small wooden sculpture I'd given him for his birthday. Racing back to the bedroom, I threw open his closet door. Empty hangers stared back at me like accusatory fingers. The drawers of his dresser gaped open, completely bare, except for a single envelope with my name written in his careful handwriting. My hands shook as I tore it open. "Victoria, by the time you read this, I'll be on a plane to San Francisco. I got the promotion, but it means relocating immediately. I've been thinking about us, about what I want for my future, and I need space to figure things out. The apartment lease is in your name, so you don't have to worry about that. I've left some cash to help with this month's rent. I hope you understand. David." I read the note 3 times before the words penetrated. He'd left, just like that. No conversation, no fight, no explanation beyond needing space. The cash he'd mentioned turned out to be $200 tucked behind the note, barely enough to cover groceries, let alone rent on an apartment I couldn't afford on my museum salary alone. The meeting with my advisor confirmed my worst fears. The grant funding had been cut due to budget constraints, effective immediately. Without that money, I couldn't afford to complete my thesis research, which meant no degree, which meant 3 years of graduate school and crushing student debt with nothing to show for it. Dr. Harrison, my advisor, was sympathetic but helpless. The department had no emergency funds, no backup options. Walking home through Portland's drizzling rain, I felt like I was moving through a nightmare. In the span of 6 hours, I'd lost my boyfriend, my financial stability, and my entire academic future. The apartment that had felt like a sanctuary, that morning now felt like a tomb. David's absence was everywhere, in the empty coffee mug he'd left in the sink, in the indent on his side of the couch, in the sudden overwhelming silence. I spent the next 3 days in a fog, alternating between fury and despair. David hadn't answered any of my calls or texts. When I finally reached him, his voice was distant and clinical. "I thought you'd be angry," he said, as if my emotions were an inconvenience he'd hoped to avoid. "This is better for both of us in the long run. You'll see. Better?" I'd screamed into the phone, "You destroyed my life." "Don't be dramatic, Victoria. You're resilient. You'll figure something out." The casual dismissal of my pain was almost worse than the abandonment itself. To him, I was simply a problem he'd efficiently solved by walking away. The 3 years we'd spent together, the plans we'd made, the future I'd sacrificed pieces of myself to support, none of it had meant enough to warrant a real conversation. By the end of the week, reality had crystallized into hard numbers. Rent $1,200. Utilities $200. Student loan payments $400. Groceries and basic expenses $300. My museum job paid just over $1,000 monthly. Even with a second job, which would make finishing my thesis impossible, I couldn't cover basic survival costs. I called my parents, swallowing my pride. They'd never approved of my art career, considering it impractical and financially irresponsible. The conversation went exactly as I'd feared. "We told you this would happen," my mother said, her voice sharp with "I told you so" satisfaction. "Art degrees don't pay bills. Maybe this is the wake-up call you needed to choose something sensible." They offered to help if I dropped out of graduate school and moved back home to work in my father's insurance office. The conditional nature of their support felt like another betrayal. They'd help me abandon my dreams, but not achieve them. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by rejection letters from every grant program, scholarship fund and emergency assistance program I'd applied to. My laptop screen glowed with my half-finished thesis, months of research and writing that would become meaningless without funding to complete it. The walls seemed to close in as I calculated and recalculated the numbers, searching for any mathematical miracle that would make survival possible. I was 25 years old, alone and staring at the collapse of everything I'd worked toward. The girl who'd confidently moved to Portland 3 years ago, ready to conquer the art world, felt like a stranger. In her place sat someone hollow and desperate, willing to consider options that would have horrified my younger self. That's when I remembered the advertisement I'd dismissed weeks earlier, buried in the back pages of a local alternative newspaper. It had seemed like a joke at the time, too bizarre to be real. Now, digging through my recycling bin at midnight, I found the crumpled page and read it again with different eyes. Seeking educated, discreet woman for temporary marriage arrangement. Significant compensation provided. References required. Serious inquiries only. Below was a phone number and an email address. No name, no details, just a cryptic offer that suddenly felt less like a scam and more like a lifeline. I stared at the ad until the words blurred, my mind cycling between desperation and disbelief. What kind of person placed an ad like this? What kind of person answered one? The answer, I realized, was someone who'd run out of other options. Someone whose carefully constructed life had crumbled in a matter of days. Someone like me. I spent the next 2 hours researching marriage for money arrangements online, discovering a shadowy world of contractual relationships, motivated by immigration needs, inheritance requirements, and family obligations. Most of the stories I found were horror tales of exploitation and abuse, but a few described mutually beneficial arrangements that had genuinely helped desperate people. At 3 in the morning, I composed an email to the address in the ad. I wrote and deleted a dozen versions, before settling on something professional but honest. I mentioned my education, my situation, and my interest in learning more about the arrangement. I hesitated for 10 minutes before hitting send, my finger hovering over the button as I considered whether I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The reply came 4 hours later, while I was staring at my ceiling and questioning every decision that had led me to this moment. The message was brief and formal, signed by someone named Thomas Whitfield, attorney at law. He requested a meeting to discuss the position, providing an address in downtown Portland and asking for my availability within the next 2 days. I spent that entire day researching Thomas Whitfield online. He was legitimate, a partner at a respected law firm specializing in estate planning and family law. His client list included several prominent Portland families. Nothing in his background suggested fraud or criminal activity, which somehow made the situation even more surreal. The law office was intimidating in its understated elegance, all dark wood and leather-bound books. Thomas Whitfield himself was a man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He treated me with the same professional courtesy he might show any client, which made the bizarre nature of our meeting feel almost normal. "I represent a client who requires a wife for a period of 2 years," he explained matter-of-factly, as if discussing a standard business contract. "The arrangement is entirely platonic and legal. In exchange for maintaining the appearance of marriage and fulfilling certain social obligations, compensation of $50,000 will be provided up front, with an additional $50,000 upon completion of the 2-year term. $100,000. More money than I'd ever seen, enough to finish my degree, pay off my loans, and start fresh. The amount was so large it felt abstract, impossible. What kind of social obligations? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Attending family events, maintaining residence at the family estate, presenting as a happily married couple when necessary. My client travels frequently for business, so the day-to-day interaction would be minimal. Why does he need a wife? Thomas paused, choosing his words carefully. There are certain inheritance provisions that require married status. The arrangement is temporary but necessary. He handed me a thick folder of documents. These are preliminary contracts and background information. If you're interested in proceeding, you would meet my client once before making a final decision. Everything is legal and above board, but I understand the unusual nature of the request. That night, I spread the contracts across my kitchen table like tarot cards revealing my future. The legal language was dense but clear. I would be Marcus Blackwood's wife in name only, living at the Blackwood estate in Mendocino County, California. I would attend family functions and business events as needed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Maintain confidentiality about the arrangement, and receive full financial support plus the promised compensation. Marcus Blackwood. I Googled him obsessively, finding very little beyond basic business information. He was 32, heir to a wine-making fortune, and intensely private. The few photos I found showed a tall man with dark hair and serious eyes, usually in the background of charity event coverage or business articles. He looked like someone carrying invisible weight. The more I researched, the more legitimate everything appeared. The Blackwood family had owned their Mendocino County estate for 4 generations. Their wine label was respected, their business dealings transparent. Whatever personal reason drove Marcus to seek a contractual wife, it wasn't connected to anything criminal or dangerous. On my second sleepless night with the contracts, I called my best friend Emma, who was finishing law school in Seattle. After I explained the situation, she was quiet for a long time. "Victoria, this is insane," she finally said. "But also kind of brilliant. The contracts look solid from what you've described. And honestly, what are your other options?" She was right. I could move back home and abandon my dreams, or take minimum wage jobs, and hope to survive long enough to maybe finish my degree in a few years. Or I could take this impossible opportunity and buy myself a real future. The meeting with Marcus was arranged for the following week, at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in downtown Portland. I spent hours choosing what to wear, settling on a conservative dress that suggested competence without trying too hard. I arrived early, my hands sweating as I waited at a corner table. When Marcus walked in, I recognized him immediately from the online photos, but his presence was more imposing in person. He moved with quiet confidence, scanning the restaurant before spotting me. Up close, his dark eyes held a sadness that the distant photos hadn't captured. "Victoria Hayes," he said, extending his hand as he approached. His voice was deep, cultured with the faintest hint of an accent I couldn't place. "Mr. Blackwood." He sat across from me, and for a moment we simply studied each other. This man was offering to pay me to marry him, yet he seemed more nervous than I felt. "Thomas explained the arrangement," he said finally. "Do you have questions?" I had 100 questions, but most of them felt too personal for this business-like interaction. "Why me?" I asked instead. Marcus smiled slightly, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. "Your application was refreshingly honest. You didn't try to present yourself as someone you're not. And your background in art restoration suggests you understand the value of preserving important things." We talked for 2 hours, covering logistics, expectations, and boundaries. Marcus was direct but not unkind, treating the conversation like a job interview for a position we both found necessary, but strange. He explained that his grandmother's will required him to be married by his 33rd birthday to inherit the family estate. Without it, everything would go to distant relatives, who planned to sell the land to developers. "The estate has been in my family for over a century," he said, real emotion entering his voice for the first time. "It's not just property, it's history, legacy, responsibility. I won't let it be destroyed for strip malls and condominiums." I understood that kind of desperation, the feeling of watching something precious slip away despite your best efforts. By the end of our meeting, the arrangement felt less like a financial transaction and more like two people helping each other solve impossible problems. 3 days later, I called Thomas Whitfield and accepted the offer. The wedding was scheduled for the following month, giving me time to settle my affairs in Portland and prepare for the most surreal chapter of my life. I told my friends I was moving to California for a new job, which was technically true. I told my parents I'd found a solution to my financial problems without specifying what that solution was. The lies felt necessary but uncomfortable. I was about to marry a stranger for money, abandoning everything familiar for a life I couldn't even imagine. But as I packed my belongings into boxes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since David had walked out of my life, I was taking control of my own future. The wedding itself was a small civil ceremony at the Mendocino County Courthouse, attended only by Thomas Whitfield and a courthouse witness. I wore a simple blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, something that could pass for bridal without feeling like a mockery of real weddings. Marcus wore a dark suit and looked as uncomfortable as I felt. When the judge pronounced us husband and wife, Marcus shook my hand formally. No kiss, no emotional moment, just a business transaction completed with legal precision. But as we signed the marriage certificate, his fingers brushed mine, and I felt a small electric shock that had nothing to do with static electricity. Now, standing in the foyer of the Blackwood estate with my new name on official documents and a check that would change my life, I wondered what I'd actually agreed to. The mansion was even more imposing than the photos had suggested, all Gothic arches and mysterious shadows. Marcus had shown me to my room, a beautiful suite on the second floor, completely separate from his quarters, and left me alone to settle in. My room was larger than my entire Portland apartment, with tall windows overlooking vineyards that stretched toward the Pacific Ocean. Antique furniture mixed with modern amenities, and fresh flowers sat on the bedside table, a thoughtful touch I hadn't expected. But despite the luxury, I felt like an intruder in someone else's life. As I unpacked my few belongings into the enormous wardrobe, I caught sight of myself in an ornate mirror. Victoria Hayes-Blackwood stared back at me, a woman I didn't recognize wearing a fake wedding ring and carrying secrets that would have shocked her 6 months ago. The girl who'd believed in fairy tale love and artistic dreams felt like a character from a book I'd once read. Outside my window, the sun was setting over the vineyard, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in this beautiful, mysterious house was my new husband, a man I barely knew who'd saved my life, with a contract I still couldn't believe I'd signed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and the beginning of understanding what I'd really committed to. But tonight, for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Whatever secrets this place held, whatever complications this arrangement would bring, I was here by choice. I was no longer the abandoned, desperate girl David had left behind. I was Victoria Blackwood now, and I had 2 years to figure out who that person was meant to be. The leap of faith. The grandfather clock in the main hallway chimed 6 times, its deep resonance echoing through the mansion like a heartbeat. I'd been awake since dawn, too nervous to sleep properly in the unfamiliar surroundings. My first full day as Mrs. Blackwood stretched ahead of me, undefined and intimidating. Marcus had mentioned over our awkward dinner the night before that he would be leaving for San Francisco on business for the rest of the week, which meant I'd be alone in this enormous house, with only the housekeeper for company. Rosa Martinez appeared in the kitchen doorway as I descended the main staircase, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. She was perhaps 60, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and hands that spoke of decades of honest work. Unlike Marcus's formal politeness, Rosa's welcome felt genuinely warm. "Buenos dias, señora," she said, gesturing toward the bright breakfast nook, where sunlight streamed through tall windows. "I hope you slept well in your new home." The word home caught me off guard. This place felt more like an elegant hotel than anywhere I might belong, but Rosa's easy acceptance of my presence helped settle some of my anxiety. She'd prepared fresh fruit, homemade pastries, and coffee that smelled like heaven, after months of drinking whatever was cheapest at the grocery store. "This is beautiful, Rosa, thank you." I settled at the small table, grateful for the informal atmosphere, after the previous evening's stilted conversation with Marcus in the formal dining room. Senor Marcus, he told me you are studying art, Rosa said, refilling my coffee cup. There are many beautiful things in this house. Perhaps you would like to explore today while he is away. The suggestion sparked the first genuine interest I'd felt since arriving. During my brief tour the night before, I'd noticed paintings lining the hallways, sculptures positioned throughout the rooms, and what appeared to be an extensive library. My art historian's mind had been cataloging pieces, even while I'd tried to process the overwhelming reality of my new living situation. After breakfast, Rosa became my unofficial guide through the mansion's treasures. Room after room revealed an impressive collection spanning several centuries. Italian Renaissance paintings hung beside contemporary pieces, while sculptural works from various periods were displayed with museum-quality lighting. In the library, first edition books filled floor-to-ceiling shelves, and display cases held manuscripts that would make any curator weep with envy. The family has been collecting for many generations, Rosa explained as we paused, before a stunning landscape that I was almost certain was an original Cézanne. Senor Marcus's great-grandfather began the collection when he first built this house. Each generation has added their own pieces. This is extraordinary, I whispered, stepping closer to examine the brushwork. Some of these pieces belong in major museums. Senor Marcus, he loves the art very much, but he does not have time to care for everything properly. So many pieces need attention, cleaning, restoration. It makes him sad, but his business keeps him traveling always. A small thrill ran through me as I understood what she was implying. Here was a private collection that rivaled anything I'd studied in graduate school, and much of it was crying out for the exact skills I'd spent years developing. Without thinking, I reached out to examine the frame of a smaller oil painting, noting the telltale signs of age and neglect that were invisible to untrained eyes. This frame has some insect damage, I murmured, more to myself than to Rosa. And the varnish on this canvas is starting to yellow the colors. Nothing irreversible, but it should be addressed soon. Rosa's eyes lit up with understanding. You know how to fix these things. It's what I studied. What I was trying to finish studying, I corrected myself, remembering the abandoned thesis back in Portland. I spent 2 years working at the Portland Art Museum learning conservation techniques. This is wonderful. You must tell Senor Marcus when he returns. He will be so happy to know someone who understands these precious things is here to help. The idea of actually contributing something valuable to this arrangement hadn't occurred to me. I'd expected to be a decorative wife, present when needed, but otherwise invisible. The possibility of meaningful work using my actual skills felt like discovering treasure in my own pocket. That afternoon, Rosa gave me free rein to explore the house more thoroughly. I found myself gravitating toward a wing that appeared to be less frequently used, where dust motes danced in afternoon sunlight, and several rooms sat empty except for furniture covered in protective sheets. At the end of a long hallway, I discovered a door that opened onto what must have once been an artist's studio. The north-facing wall was almost entirely glass, providing the perfect natural light that painters had always prized. Built-in cabinets lined the other walls, and a large easel still stood in the center of the room, though it was clear no one had worked here in years. The space felt frozen in time, waiting for creative energy to bring it back to life. This was Senora Eleanor's studio, Rosa said, appearing behind me with the silent grace she seemed to possess. Senor Marcus's grandmother. She was a painter, very talented. She died 3 years ago. The woman whose will requires Marcus to marry, I said, pieces clicking together in my mind. Rosa nodded sadly. She loved this house so much, she could not bear the thought of it being sold, broken apart. She hoped marriage would help Senor Marcus find happiness here, give him reason to stay instead of always traveling. I walked around the abandoned studio, imagining it in its productive days.
Eleanor Blackwood must have spent countless hours here, creating works that might now hang in the house's collection. The room held an energy that spoke of passion and dedication, qualities I'd thought I'd lost somewhere between David's abandonment and my desperate financial circumstances. What was she like? I asked. Rosa's face softened with memories. Strong woman, independent. She married for love, but her husband died young in the war. She raised Senor Marcus's father alone, kept the vineyard running during difficult times. She never remarried, but she was happy. She had her art, her family, her land.
She used to say that happiness comes from creating something beautiful, not from having everything perfect. The words resonated deeper than I expected. In Portland, I'd been so focused on achieving the perfect life that I'd forgotten why I'd fallen in love with art in the first place. The joy of discovery, the satisfaction of bringing damaged beauty back to life, the connection between past and present that restoration work provided, all of that had gotten lost in grant applications and thesis deadlines and trying to be the girlfriend David wanted me to be. That evening, alone in the vast house except for Rosa, who lived in a small apartment above the kitchen, I called Emma. She answered on the first ring, eager for details about my new life. "So what's he like? Your mysterious husband?" she asked after I described the house and the art collection. "Complicated," I said honestly. "Polite but distant. He treats this like a business arrangement, which I suppose it is. But there's something sad about him, like he's carrying some heavy burden. And you're okay with that, the distance, I mean." I considered the question as I looked out my bedroom window at the moonlit vineyard stretching toward the dark ocean. "I think so. I mean, I'm not looking for romance right now. After David, I just need time to figure out who I am without someone else defining that for me." "That's weirdly mature of you," Emma laughed. "So what will you do with yourself for 2 years in wine country?" "Actually, I think I might have found something. The house has this incredible art collection, and a lot of it needs conservation work. Rosa thinks Marcus would be interested in having me help with that." "Victoria, that's perfect. You could finish your thesis research using their collection, document your restoration work, turn it into a portfolio that would get you hired anywhere." The possibility hadn't fully formed in my mind until Emma voiced it, but she was right. Here was access to pieces I could never afford to study otherwise, along with the time and resources to do the work properly. Instead of seeing these 2 years as a pause in my career, I could use them to build something even stronger. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Instead of waiting for Marcus to return and give me direction, I decided to take initiative. I asked Rosa for cleaning supplies and spent the day carefully dusting and organizing Eleanor's abandoned studio. The north light was everything I'd hoped, and the built-in storage revealed treasures, professional-grade brushes, tubes of paint that were old but still usable, and most excitingly, a cabinet full of art restoration supplies. Eleanor had apparently done her own conservation work on family pieces. I found detailed notes in her handwriting, documentation of treatments she'd performed on various paintings, even before and after photographs of her restoration projects. This woman had been not just a painter but a skilled conservator, working to preserve her family's artistic heritage. By the time Marcus returned 3 days later, I had transformed the dusty studio into a functional workspace. I'd also completed a preliminary assessment of 12 paintings that showed signs of needing attention, documenting my findings in a professional report that would have impressed my graduate professors. I heard his car in the gravel driveway around dinner time and felt my stomach clench with nervous anticipation. How would he react to my unauthorized exploration of his house? Would he see my initiative as overstepping boundaries or as valuable contribution? Rosa had prepared another formal dinner, and we sat at opposite ends of the long dining table like strangers forced to share a meal. Marcus looked tired from his trip, his usual reserved politeness even more pronounced. We made stilted conversation about his business meetings and my settling in process until I finally gathered courage to mention what I'd discovered. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been exploring the house while you were away. Rosa mentioned that you might be interested in having some of the art collection evaluated for conservation needs." Marcus looked up from his wine, the first spark of genuine interest I'd seen from him. "You're qualified to do that kind of assessment. I have 2 years of hands-on experience at the Portland Art Museum, plus 3 years of graduate study in art conservation. I found your grandmother's studio and some of her restoration notes. She did beautiful work." Something shifted in Marcus's expression at the mention of his grandmother. The careful politeness cracked slightly, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. "You were in her studio. I'm sorry if that was presumptuous. Rosa said it hadn't been used since she passed away, and I thought maybe it could be useful again." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in his glass as he considered my words. "My grandmother would have liked that," he said finally. "She always said the house needed someone who understood its treasures. She'd be pleased to know her studio was being used for its intended purpose again." Relief flooded through me. I've prepared a preliminary report on pieces that need attention. Some are minor issues, cleaning, varnish touch-ups. Others require more extensive work. Would you like to see it? For the first time since I'd met him, Marcus smiled genuinely. I'd like that very much. After dinner, I led him to Eleanor's restored studio, watching his face as he took in the changes I'd made. His fingers traced the surface of her painting table, now cleared and ready for work, and he spent a long time examining the conservation notes I'd organized and displayed. She never let anyone else work in here, he said quietly. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to change anything, but I also couldn't stand looking at it gathering dust. It's a beautiful space. She had excellent equipment, high-quality materials. She clearly took the work very seriously. Marcus picked up one of Eleanor's brushes, handling it with the reverence reserved for sacred objects. She used to say that taking care of beautiful things was a responsibility, not just to the present but to the future. People who would come after us deserved to see these works as they were meant to be seen. I understood then that this wasn't just about art conservation, this was about honoring Eleanor's memory, continuing work that had meant everything to her. The weight of that responsibility was both daunting and exciting. I'd like to help, I said. If you're comfortable with that, I could start with some of the less valuable pieces, document everything thoroughly. It would actually help me finish my own thesis research. Marcus turned to face me fully, and for the first time since we'd met, I felt like he was really seeing me as a person rather than a necessity. Conservation techniques for 19th century oil paintings, specifically dealing with age-related deterioration in private collections versus museum-controlled environments. Having access to works that have been in stable private care for generations would provide incredible research opportunities. So this arrangement could benefit your career as well as solving your immediate financial needs.
Yes.
Though I didn't expect that when I agreed to the marriage. I thought I'd be. I paused, unsure how to finish the sentence without sounding ungrateful. Ornamental, Marcus supplied with a wry smile. Present when needed but otherwise invisible. Something like that. I think we can do better than that for both of us. Marcus moved to the window, looking out at the vineyard where moonlight silvered the grape leaves. I've been managing this estate since I was 25, when my father died. For 7 years, I've been trying to balance preservation with modernization, tradition with financial reality. I travel constantly because the wine business requires it, but it means I never have time to properly care for the things that matter most to my family's legacy. He turned back to me, and I saw something like hope in his expression. Maybe this arrangement can be more than just a business transaction. Maybe we can help each other with things that actually matter. I'd like that, I said, meaning it more than I'd expected. Then welcome to your new job, Mrs. Blackwood. Eleanor would be proud. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I'd entered this marriage as a desperate woman with no options, willing to sell 2 years of my life for financial survival. But somewhere in the process of exploring this house, understanding its history, and finding my own place within it, I'd stopped being a victim of circumstances. Tomorrow, I would begin real work using skills I'd spent years developing. I had access to resources most conservators could only dream of, and the time to pursue research that could launch my career in directions I'd never imagined. Most importantly, I was no longer defining myself by what David had taken from me, or by what desperate measures I'd had to take to survive his abandonment. I was Victoria Blackwood now, and Victoria Blackwood had work to do. The transformation had begun, not with grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but with the simple act of cleaning dust from unused paintbrushes and bringing light back into a darkened studio. Sometimes the most profound changes started with the smallest steps forward, and I was finally ready to take them. The learning and building 3 weeks into my residency at the Blackwood estate, I had established a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Mornings were spent in Eleanor's studio, carefully cleaning and assessing paintings under the perfect north light. Afternoons found me in the library, researching the provenance of various pieces and documenting my findings in meticulous detail. Evenings were for correspondence with former professors and art world contacts, slowly rebuilding professional relationships I'd let languish during my troubled final months in Portland. The work was revelatory. Away from the pressure of thesis deadlines and graduate school politics, I rediscovered the pure joy that had drawn me to art conservation in the first place. Each painting revealed secrets under careful examination, hidden signatures, evidence of previous restorations, layers of history that spoke across centuries. I was developing an intimacy with these works that no museum position could have provided. Marcus had been true to his word about supporting my research. He'd given me access to family records dating back 4 generations, and Rosa had proven invaluable in sharing oral histories about how various pieces had come into the collection. Together we were building a comprehensive catalog that was already attracting interest from art historians I'd contacted. "You have brought this house back to life," Rosa said one morning, as she delivered coffee to the studio. I was bent over a small landscape, using a cotton swab to gently remove decades of accumulated grime from what I was becoming convinced was an unknown work by a prominent California plein-air painter. "This place was already alive," I replied, sitting back to rest my eyes. "I'm just helping it breathe better." Rosa smiled at the metaphor. "Senora Eleanor," she used to say something similar. That art was like people. It needed care and attention to show its true beauty. The comparison to Eleanor was becoming commonplace, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Marcus had mentioned several times that my approach to the work reminded him of his grandmother, and while I appreciated the compliment, I wondered if I was becoming some sort of replacement for his grief, rather than establishing my own identity. That concern deepened when Catherine Rodriguez, a local gallery owner, stopped by for the studio tour Marcus had arranged. Kat, as she insisted I call her, was close to my age with an easy confidence that spoke of someone who'd found her place in the world. She ran a small but respected gallery in the nearby town of Mendocino, showcasing both historical and contemporary works by regional artists. "This is incredible," Kat said, examining the landscape I'd been working on. "If this is what I think it is, it could be worth 6 figures. How did you learn to spot these details?" "Years of training and a lot of practice," I said, then found myself adding, "plus access to resources most people never get." Kat glanced around the studio, taking in the professional equipment and perfect lighting. "Marcus mentioned you're documenting the conservation work for academic purposes. Are you planning to publish?" "That's the hope. My thesis advisor back in Portland thinks the research could become a book if I have enough material." "And after your 2 years here, what then?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the immediate work that I hadn't seriously considered what would happen when the contract ended. Where would I go? What would I do with the experience and credentials I was building here? "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "I suppose I'll return to museum work, or maybe freelance conservation." Kat nodded thoughtfully. "Well, if you ever want to stay in the area, there's a growing market for private conservation services. Wealthy collectors up and down the coast are always looking for qualified professionals they can trust." After Kat left, I found myself staring out the studio windows at the vineyard, considering her words. For the first time since agreeing to this arrangement, I was thinking beyond mere survival to actual career planning. The work I was doing here wasn't just killing time, it was building something substantial. That evening, Marcus returned from another business trip to find me in the library, surrounded by research materials and typing furiously on my laptop. He'd been traveling more frequently lately, expanding the winery's distribution network, but he always made time to review my progress when he returned. "How did the meeting with Catherine go?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my makeshift desk. "Very well. She thinks the landscape might be a significant discovery. She also mentioned opportunities for private conservation work in the area." Marcus raised an eyebrow, thinking of staying in California permanently. "I don't know, maybe. This work is exactly what I'd hoped to be doing when I started graduate school. The access to primary sources, the freedom to pursue interesting discoveries without institutional politics, it's ideal." But I hesitated, not sure how to articulate the growing complication in my feelings. "I keep wondering if I'm just playing house here, living in your grandmother's space, doing her work, being compared to her constantly. Am I building my own career, or just stepping into someone else's life?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering my words with the careful attention he gave everything. "Do you want to know what I really think?" Yes, Eleanor would have hated the idea of someone trying to replace her. She was fiercely independent, determined to carve out her own path, even when society expected her to be something different. What she would have loved is knowing that her tools and knowledge were helping someone else find their own way. He leaned forward, his expression more serious than usual.
You're not replacing her, Victoria. You're honoring what she built by using it to create something entirely your own. The research you're producing, the discoveries you're making, those are yours. The fact that you're doing it in her studio just means her legacy is continuing to serve its purpose. The validation meant more than I'd expected. Over the past month, Marcus had evolved from a polite stranger into something approaching a friend. Our dinner conversations had grown less formal, focusing on shared interests in history and art, rather than awkward small talk. He'd begun seeking my opinion on estate matters, particularly those involving the house's cultural heritage. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, Marcus continued. I've been thinking about Catherine's suggestion regarding private conservation work. What if we made this arrangement more permanent? My heart rate quickened, though I wasn't sure if it was excitement or panic. What do you mean? Not the marriage, he clarified quickly. I mean the work. What if we established a formal conservation studio here? You could take on clients from throughout the region while continuing to work on our collection. It would give you professional independence, while allowing you to stay in an environment where you're clearly thriving. The proposal was both thrilling and terrifying. It would mean committing to a life I'd never planned, in a place I'd come to by accident, with a man I barely knew. But it would also mean building something substantial from the foundation I was already creating. I'd need proper credentials, I said, my mind racing through practical considerations. Business licensing, insurance, professional certifications beyond what I have now, all achievable. The question is whether it's what you want. Before I could answer, Rosa appeared in the library doorway, with an apologetic expression. Perdón, Señor Marcus, but there is a phone call for Señora Victoria, a man from Portland who says it is urgent. My stomach dropped. Only a few people had this number, and none of them should be calling unless something was seriously wrong. I followed Rosa to the kitchen phone, my hands trembling as I lifted the receiver. Victoria, thank God, it's Dr. Harrison. My former thesis advisor's voice was strained with an emotion I couldn't identify. Dr. Harrison, what's wrong? Is everything okay? I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your old number was disconnected, and your emergency contact information was out of date. Victoria, we need to talk about your thesis. I thought that was finished. I thought the funding issues made it impossible to complete. That's what I thought too, but something extraordinary has happened. Do you remember the Hartwell Foundation? I did remember a prestigious grant program that funded innovative art historical research. I'd applied months ago, but had been rejected along with hundreds of other applicants. They've reconsidered your application. Apparently one of their board members saw preliminary reports about your work with private collections and was intrigued. They're offering full funding for thesis completion plus a substantial stipend for living expenses. The room seemed to tilt around me. I don't understand. What preliminary reports? Your documentation of the Blackwood collection work. Someone shared it with academic contact, and it's generating serious interest. The foundation wants to fund a comprehensive study of conservation practices in private versus institutional settings, using your current work as the primary case study. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to process what he was saying. How much funding? $75,000 over 18 months. Renewable if the research merits continuation. Victoria, this is career-making money. The kind of grant that launches entire academic trajectories. After hanging up, I stood frozen in the kitchen, my mind spinning with possibilities and implications. This grant would give me everything I'd thought I'd lost: academic credentials, financial independence, professional recognition. But it would also require returning to Portland, to the world I'd fled, to proximity to David, and all the pain associated with that chapter of my life. Marcus found me there 20 minutes later, still staring at the phone, as if it might ring again with different news. Bad news, he asked. Good news, actually. I think I'm not sure. I explained about the grant, about the opportunity to complete my thesis with full funding and academic support. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. That's wonderful, he said finally, though his tone suggested the opposite. Exactly the kind of opportunity you deserve. It would mean leaving here, returning to Portland. I understand, but I wasn't sure he did understand, because I wasn't sure I understood it myself. 3 months ago, this grant would have felt like salvation. Now it felt like a complication that threatened to disrupt something valuable I was building. I don't have to decide immediately, I said. Dr. Harrison is giving me 2 weeks to consider the offer. What's to consider?
This is your career, your future, Everything you worked toward before you ended up here. His words stung because they reduced my current life to an accident, a detour from my real path. But was that wrong? Had I been fooling myself about the significance of what I was building at the estate? That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through possibilities. The grant represented security, validation, a return to the trajectory I'd planned for my life. But it also meant abandoning work that felt more meaningful than anything I'd done in graduate school, leaving a place where I'd found unexpected belonging, walking away from people who'd become important to me. The next few days passed in a blur of research and reflection. I threw myself into the conservation work with renewed intensity, as if documenting every detail could help me understand what I'd be giving up. I also began reaching out to contacts in the academic world, gauging interest in the research I was producing and the career paths it might open. The responses were uniformly encouraging. My documentation of the Blackwood collection was apparently creating quite a stir in conservation circles. Several museum curators expressed interest in hiring me based on the work samples I'd shared. 2 prestigious graduate programs indicated I'd be welcome to transfer if I wanted to complete my thesis in a different institutional setting. For the first time since David's abandonment, I had options, real choices about my future, rather than just desperate survival strategies. The irony wasn't lost on me that this abundance of opportunity had emerged from what I'd initially seen as the most desperate decision of my life. Kat stopped by again toward the end of the week, ostensibly to check on my progress with the landscape painting but clearly fishing for information about my plans. "Marcus mentioned you might be returning to Portland," she said as we examined the cleaned painting under different lighting conditions. "Nothing's decided yet. There's an academic opportunity that's very tempting. But I'm not sure it's what I actually want anymore. When I first came here, I thought this was just a way to survive until I could get back to my real life. Now I'm not sure what my real life is supposed to be." Kat nodded knowingly. "I moved here from San Francisco 5 years ago. Thought it would be temporary, just a chance to run a small gallery while I figured out my next move. Turned out this was my next move. I just didn't recognize it at first." "How did you know?" "When I stopped thinking about leaving and started thinking about staying. When I realized I was building something here that I couldn't build anywhere else." Her words echoed in my mind as I walked through the vineyard that evening, something I'd taken to doing when I needed to think. The late October air was crisp with approaching winter, and the grape leaves had turned brilliant shades of gold and red. In a few weeks the harvest would begin, a process I'd been looking forward to participating in for the first time. If I took the grant, I'd miss the harvest. I'd miss seeing the paintings I'd been working on reach completion. I'd miss the community I was slowly becoming part of, the professional relationships I was building, the sense of purpose I'd found in this unexpected place. But I'd also miss the opportunity to complete my formal education, to earn credentials that would open doors throughout the art world, to establish myself in the academic community I'd always considered my professional home. As I reached the edge of the vineyard where the land dropped toward the ocean, I realized that this decision wasn't really about choosing between 2 opportunities. It was about choosing between 2 versions of myself, the person I'd planned to become, and the person I was actually becoming. The Victoria who'd applied for that grant months ago had been focused on external validation, on achieving goals set by other people's expectations. The Victoria standing in this vineyard had discovered the satisfaction of meaningful work done for its own sake, of contributions that mattered to real people in tangible ways. Both versions had value. Both represented legitimate paths forward, but only one felt authentically mine. When I returned to the house, I found Marcus in his study, working late over vineyard financial reports. He looked up as I knocked on the doorframe, and I saw something vulnerable in his expression that he quickly masked. "I've been thinking about the grant," I said, and I want to understand something. When you offered to make the conservation work permanent, were you offering because you think it's what I want, or because it's what you want?" Marcus set down his pen and studied me with the intensity he usually reserved for business decisions. "Does it matter?" "Yes. It matters a lot." He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Both, I suppose. You're obviously gifted at this work, and the collection needs someone with your skills. But also, this house has felt more alive in the past month than it has since Eleanor died. Having someone here who understands what makes this place special, who sees its potential rather than just its obligations, that's been valuable to me personally. So if I stay, it's not just about the work." "No, it's not just about the work." The admission hung between us, weighted with implications neither of us was quite ready to explore. Our arrangement had been strictly business, but somewhere in the process of working together, sharing meals, discussing art and history and dreams, something more complex had developed. I need to call Dr. Harrison tomorrow, I said. And what will you tell him? I smiled, feeling a certainty settle over me that I hadn't experienced in months. I'm going to tell him I'm exactly where I need to be. The phone call to Dr. Harrison was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. His disappointment was palpable even through the crackling connection, and I could hear years of professional investment in my success dissolving with each word I spoke. Victoria, I don't think you understand what you're walking away from, he said after I'd explained my decision to decline the grant. This isn't just funding, it's validation from the most respected foundation in our field. Do you realize how many doors this could open? I do understand, I replied, standing in the morning light of Eleanor's studio, with my hands wrapped around a cup of Rosa's coffee. But I've found something here that I can't replicate anywhere else. I'm building a career on my own terms, not trying to fit into someone else's vision of what my professional life should look like. The silence stretched uncomfortably before he spoke again. What happens when this private arrangement ends? When your benefactor loses interest or finds someone else to play patron to, you'll have no institutional affiliations, no academic credentials, no safety net. His concerns weren't unfounded, but they belonged to the old Victoria, the one who'd measured success by other people's approval and security by traditional markers. Then I'll build something new, I said. I've gotten pretty good at that lately. After ending the call, I sat in the quiet studio for nearly an hour, second-guessing myself and mourning the path I'd chosen not to take. But when I finally picked up my conservation tools and returned to work on a delicate watercolor that had been damaged by decades of improper storage, the familiar satisfaction of meaningful work settled over me like a protective cloak. Marcus found me there later that morning, bent over the painting with a magnifying glass as I carefully removed aged adhesive that previous restorers had applied incorrectly. How did Dr. Harrison take the news? He asked. About as well as expected. He thinks I'm making a terrible mistake. Marcus examined the watercolor over my shoulder, close enough that I could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. Our proximity had become more comfortable over the past weeks, the rigid formality of our early interactions gradually giving way to an easy partnership. Are you making a mistake? I set down the magnifying glass and looked up at him. Ask me again in 5 years. His smile was warmer than usual, carrying a relief he didn't try to hide. Fair enough. In the meantime, I have news that might make you feel better about your decision. Thomas Whitfield called this morning. Thomas was the lawyer who'd arranged our marriage, and any contact from him made me nervous. What did he want? Eleanor's will had some provisions I wasn't fully aware of. Apparently, she left a substantial sum specifically for maintaining and expanding the art collection. Thomas has been waiting for me to marry before releasing those funds. My heart rate quickened. How substantial? Substantial enough to properly endow a conservation studio. Equipment, materials, staff if needed. She wanted to ensure the collection would always have proper care, and she was willing to fund that care indefinitely. The implications were staggering. Instead of operating on a shoestring budget with borrowed supplies, I could have access to professional-grade equipment that most museums couldn't afford. I could take on complex restoration projects that required specialized tools and materials. There's more, Marcus continued. Thomas also mentioned that the will includes provisions for establishing a foundation. If we choose to pursue it, we could create a formal nonprofit organization dedicated to art conservation education and research. A foundation? Think about it, we could offer internships, host symposiums, maybe even partner with universities to provide hands-on training for conservation students. Eleanor always regretted not having children to pass her knowledge to. This would be a way to share what she learned with the next generation. The vision he painted was intoxicating. Instead of working in isolation, I could be part of creating something that would impact the field for decades to come. Young conservators could learn in the same studio where I was now discovering my own capabilities, using the same tools and techniques that Eleanor had perfected over her lifetime. What would that mean for our arrangement? I asked. The marriage contract was for 2 years. Marcus sat down across from me, his expression thoughtful. That's something we'd need to discuss. The foundation would be a long-term commitment, not something you could establish and then walk away from after a few months. The conversation was interrupted by Rosa calling from the kitchen that lunch was ready, but Marcus's words stayed with me throughout the afternoon. A foundation would mean permanence, roots in this place that went far deeper than our temporary marriage arrangement. It would also mean continued close partnership with Marcus, a prospect that had become increasingly appealing as I'd gotten to know him better. That evening, Kat stopped by with a bottle of local wine and an excuse about wanting to see my latest restoration work. But it quickly became clear she had ulterior motives. "So the word around town is that you turned down some fancy academic position to stay here," she said, as we sat on the terrace overlooking the vineyard. "News travels fast in small communities." "It does. And people are curious about the mysterious Mrs. Blackwood, who's breathing new life into the old estate." I raised an eyebrow. "Mysterious?" Kat laughed. "You have to admit, showing up out of nowhere, marrying Marcus after knowing him for what, 5 minutes? And now you're establishing yourself as some kind of art conservation expert. People are intrigued. What are they saying?" "Mostly positive things. That you're good for Marcus, that the house seems happier with you in it. Rosa's been singing your praises to anyone who'll listen, and you know how much weight her opinion carries around here." The validation from the local community meant more than I'd expected. I'd been so focused on professional recognition that I'd underestimated the value of being accepted by the people who'd known this family for generations. "There is one thing though," Kat continued, her tone becoming more serious. "There are some questions about the nature of your marriage. The timing was unusual, and Marcus has always been private about his personal life." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "What kind of questions?" "Nothing malicious. But when someone like Marcus suddenly marries a woman no one's ever heard of, people wonder about the circumstances. Especially when that woman happens to solve several problems he's been dealing with." The comment stung because it touched on my own insecurities about the arrangement. Was I being accepted for my own merits, or was I simply a convenient solution to Marcus's inheritance problems? "Does it matter what people think?" I asked. "Not to me. But it might matter to you if you're planning to build a life here. Small communities can be welcoming, but they can also be judgmental if they think someone isn't being genuine." That night, I found myself questioning everything again. Kat's words had awakened doubts I'd been trying to suppress about whether my acceptance here was real or conditional. Was my growing relationship with Marcus based on genuine connection, or was I just a useful partner in solving his family obligations? The uncertainty followed me through the next several days as I threw myself into the foundation planning process. Marcus had arranged meetings with Thomas Whitfield and several other professionals to discuss the legal and financial aspects of establishing a nonprofit organization. The conversations were exciting but also overwhelming. Talk of board structures, mission statements, fundraising strategies, and long-term sustainability plans. During one particularly intense meeting about tax implications and donation policies, I realized that everyone in the room was looking to me for decisions about an organization that would bear my professional reputation. The responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. "The key question," Thomas explained, "is whether you want to establish this as an independent foundation, or as part of a larger institutional structure. Independence gives you more control, but also more liability. What would you recommend?" I asked. "Given the scope of what you're envisioning, and the resources available, I'd suggest starting independent, but with provisions for future partnerships. That way you can establish your own identity and methods before potentially aligning with universities or museums." After the meeting, Marcus and I walked through the vineyard as we often did when we needed to process complex information. The late November air was crisp, and the bare vines created elegant geometric patterns against the rolling hills. "Are you having second thoughts?" Marcus asked as we paused at our usual spot overlooking the ocean. "Yes and no. The foundation idea is incredible, but it's also permanent in a way that makes me nervous. What if I'm not qualified to run something like that? What if I fail? What if you succeed beyond your wildest dreams?" I looked at him, struck by the confidence in his voice. "You really think I can do this?" "Victoria, in the past 4 months, you've brought order to a collection that's been neglected for years, discovered at least 3 significant works that had been misattributed, and produced research that's garnering attention from experts across the country. You've earned the respect of everyone you've worked with, and found solutions to problems I didn't even know existed." His words were generous, but I heard something else in his tone, something that sounded almost like pride. Not the distant approval of an employer, but the warm recognition of someone who'd watched me grow and succeed. "There's something I need to tell you," I said,
gathering courage for a conversation I'd been avoiding. Kat mentioned that people in town are curious about our marriage. About the timing and circumstances. Marcus nodded slowly. I'm not surprised. It was rather sudden from an outside perspective. Does it bother you? The speculation, not as much as I thought it would. When I first agreed to this arrangement, I was focused purely on practical concerns, satisfying Eleanor's will, keeping the estate intact. I didn't think much about how it would look to other people or how it might affect whoever agreed to marry me. He turned to face me directly, his expression more serious than usual, but somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like a business transaction. You're not just fulfilling a contract, Victoria. You're building something real here, contributing something valuable that goes far beyond what either of us originally envisioned. The admission hung between us, heavy with implications. Our arrangement had begun as a mutually beneficial solution to desperate circumstances, but it had evolved into something neither of us had planned for, a partnership that felt increasingly genuine despite its artificial origins. What happens when the 2 years are up? I asked. I don't know. What do you want to happen? It was a question I'd been avoiding, but standing there in the gathering dusk with the vineyard spread below us, and the foundation plans taking shape in my mind, I realized I had an answer. I want to build something lasting, I said. Not just professionally, but personally. I want to create a life here that's mine, not something I fell into by accident or desperation. Marcus stepped closer, and for a moment I thought he might touch me. Instead, he said quietly, "Then let's build it together." The foundation paperwork was filed the following week, establishing the Eleanor Blackwood Institute for Art Conservation as a California nonprofit organization. I was listed as founding director, with Marcus serving as board chair and primary benefactor. The mission statement we'd crafted together emphasized hands-on education, innovative research, and public access to conservation knowledge. Our first major project would be a comprehensive catalog and conservation assessment of the entire Blackwood collection, with the results to be published as both an academic resource and a public exhibition. I'd also begin accepting outside clients, building a reputation that would attract both private collectors and institutional partnerships. The day the incorporation documents arrived, Rosa found me in the studio, staring at the official papers with my name prominently featured throughout. The title founding director felt surreal, like playing dress-up in someone else's life. You look worried, Rosa observed, setting down a tray with tea and her homemade cookies. I'm terrified, I admitted. 6 months ago, I was a graduate student with no money and no prospects. Now I'm supposed to run a foundation. Rosa sat down beside me, her weathered hands folding calmly in her lap. You know what Senora Eleanor used to say when she was afraid of something? What she would say, fear means you care about something important. If you weren't afraid, it would mean the work didn't matter. The simple wisdom hit me with unexpected force. I was afraid because this mattered, because I'd found something worth protecting and nurturing. The fear wasn't a sign of inadequacy, it was evidence that I'd discovered work that aligned with my deepest values. She also used to say, Rosa continued with a small smile, that the best way to stop being afraid was to get so busy doing good work that you forgot to worry about whether you were qualified. That afternoon, I received a call that put Rosa's advice to the test. Janet Morrison, curator of European paintings at the De Young Museum in San Francisco, had heard about my work through academic networks and wanted to discuss a potential collaboration. We have several pieces that need conservation attention, but our internal capacity is limited, she explained. We're particularly interested in your research on private collection care versus institutional methods. Would you be interested in consulting on a project that could become a case study for your institute? The opportunity was exactly what I'd dreamed of, a chance to work with a major museum, while maintaining independence through my own organization. It would also provide credibility that could open doors to future partnerships. I'd be very interested, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. What kind of timeline are you considering? We'd want to start as soon as possible. The pieces in question are valuable but deteriorating, and we've been putting off treatment because we couldn't find the right conservator. Your background and current research make you an ideal fit. After ending the call, I realized that I'd just accepted my first major commission as an independent professional. No thesis advisor, no institutional oversight, no safety net beyond my own knowledge and skills. It was exactly the kind of challenge that would have paralyzed me 6 months ago, but now it felt like validation of everything I'd been building. When Marcus returned from a wine industry conference that evening, I shared the news about the museum project. His reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "This is exactly what we hoped would happen," he said, opening a bottle of champagne to celebrate. "Your first major client, and it's one of the most respected museums on the West Coast. It's also terrifying. What if I mess up? What if I'm not as good as they think I am? Then you'll learn from it and do better next time. That's how expertise is built, through experience, not just education." As we sat on the terrace with our champagne, watching stars emerge over the Pacific, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The desperate woman who'd answered that bizarre marriage advertisement felt like a character from someone else's story. In her place was someone I was still getting to know, a professional who commanded respect, a partner in meaningful work, a person building something lasting from the ground up. "Marcus," I said, as the silence stretched comfortable between us, "thank you. For what? For seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself, for believing this could work when I was too scared to hope for anything beyond survival." He turned to look at me, his expression soft in the moonlight. "You did all the hard work, Victoria. I just provided the opportunity. It was more than that, and you know it." The moment stretched between us, weighted with everything we weren't quite ready to say. Our marriage might have begun as a practical arrangement, but what we'd built together had become something far more complex and valuable.
Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the museum project, foundation responsibilities, the ongoing work of establishing myself in a field I'd once thought was lost to me forever. But tonight, sitting under stars I'd learned to recognize, in a place that had become home, with a man who'd become more than a convenient partner, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before David's betrayal. I felt powerful. Not in the way that came from controlling others or forcing circumstances to bend to my will, but in the quiet confidence that came from knowing I could build something meaningful from whatever materials life provided. I'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me and transformed it into the foundation for a life I actually wanted to live. The mastery I'd achieved wasn't just professional, it was personal. I'd mastered the art of creating my own opportunities, of seeing potential where others saw only problems, of turning desperate circumstances into deliberate choices. And this was only the beginning. The test spring arrived at the Blackwood estate with a burst of wild flowers that transformed the hillsides into an impressionist masterpiece. I'd been living there for 8 months now, and the rhythms of the seasons had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. The Eleanor Blackwood Institute was thriving beyond my wildest expectations, with 3 major museum partnerships, a waiting list of private clients, and our first conservation fellowship scheduled to begin in the fall. I was in the studio, putting finishing touches on a particularly challenging restoration for the De Young Museum, when Rosa knocked on the doorframe with an expression I'd learned to associate with unwelcome news. "Senora Victoria, there is someone here to see you. A man from Portland who says he is your, how do you say, ex-novio." My brush froze mid-stroke. David. After almost a year of blessed silence, the last person I wanted to see had somehow tracked me down to my sanctuary. Did he give his name? David Chen. "He is waiting in the front parlor. He seems agitado." I set down my brush with hands that had begun to tremble. David's appearance could only mean trouble. He'd made it clear when I'd left Portland that he considered me a closed chapter in his life. For him to travel all the way to California meant something had gone very wrong, or very right, in his world. I found him standing before the Cezanne in the front parlor, his back to the door. He'd always appreciated fine art, though more for its status value than its intrinsic beauty. The expensive suit and Italian leather shoes were new, suggesting his career had continued its upward trajectory since he'd abandoned me. "Hello, David." He turned and the shock on his face was almost comical. I'd changed significantly since our last encounter: sun-kissed skin, hair lightened by coastal air, and most importantly a confidence in my bearing that hadn't existed during our relationship. "My God, Victoria, you look incredible." "Thank you. What are you doing here?" His charming smile, once so effective at disarming my defenses, now seemed calculated and hollow. "Can't an old friend visit? I was in San Francisco on business, and heard through mutual contacts that you were living in the area." "We're not friends, David, and I find it hard to believe you drove 2 hours just to say hello." His expression shifted, revealing the determination beneath the superficial pleasantness. "You're right, I came because I need to talk to you about us." "There is no us. You made that very clear when you disappeared in the middle of the night." "I made a mistake, Victoria. A terrible, stupid mistake that I've regretted every day since." The words I'd once desperately wanted to hear now sounded tinny and rehearsed. What's really going on, David? Why are you here? He moved closer, and I instinctively stepped back. I got the promotion, Senior Vice President of Development. I'm making more money than we ever dreamed of, and I have a corner office overlooking the city. Everything I worked for, everything we planned together. Congratulations. I hope you're happy. That's just it, I'm not happy. I thought success would be enough, but it's empty without someone to share it with. I want you back, Victoria. I want us to try again. The audacity of his assumption that I'd be waiting for him to decide he wanted me back was breathtaking. David, I'm married. I know about your arrangement with Blackwood. I hired a private investigator. Ice ran through my veins. You had me investigated? I had to understand what happened to you, how you ended up here. The marriage isn't real, Victoria. It's a business transaction. You can walk away anytime you want. How dare you? I know you needed money, and I know this Blackwood character needed a wife for inheritance reasons. It's actually quite clever, but it's not a real life. It's not the future you deserve. The patronizing tone was exactly what I remembered most hating about our relationship, his absolute certainty that he knew what was best for me better than I did. My life here is very real, I said coldly. More real than anything I had with you. Playing house in someone else's mansion, pretending to be an art expert when you don't even have a completed degree? This isn't you, Victoria. This is some fantasy you're living because you're afraid to face reality. The reality where you abandoned me without a word. The reality where you left me financially ruined and emotionally destroyed. That reality. David had the grace to look ashamed, but only briefly. I explained that I was under tremendous pressure at work. The promotion required immediate relocation, and you thought you'd make the decision for both of us without consulting me. Just like you made every other important decision in our relationship. I'm trying to apologize here. I'm trying to make things right. 300 days too late. The exact number surprised us both. I hadn't realized I'd been unconsciously counting the days since his betrayal, marking time from my lowest point to this moment of strength. Victoria, please. I love you. I never stopped loving you. The words that would once have melted my resistance now felt like an insult to my intelligence. You love the idea of me. The version of me that existed to support your ambitions and make you look good at company parties. You have no idea who I actually am. I know you better than anyone. We were together for 3 years. You knew the woman I was pretending to be to keep you happy. The woman who gave up her own dreams to support yours. Who made herself smaller so you could feel bigger. That woman doesn't exist anymore. David's composure cracked slightly, revealing the desperation beneath his polished exterior. What can I do? How can I prove that I've changed? You can't because you haven't. You're still the same person who thinks love means possession, who believes you can disappear from someone's life and then waltz back in when it's convenient. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made us both turn. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral as he assessed the tension in the room. I'm sorry to interrupt. Rosa mentioned we had a visitor. Marcus, this is David Chen, my former boyfriend from Portland. David, my husband Marcus Blackwood. The two men studied each other with the careful attention of predators determining threat levels. David's confidence wavered slightly as he took in Marcus's presence. The quiet authority, the obvious belonging in these elegant surroundings, the protective way he positioned himself near me. Mr. Chen, Marcus said politely. I hope you'll stay for dinner. Victoria speaks of Portland often. The invitation was clearly a test, and David was smart enough to recognize it. That's generous, but I can't stay long. I was just catching up with Victoria, reminiscing about old times. There's nothing to reminisce about, I said firmly. David was just leaving. But David wasn't ready to surrender. Actually, I was hoping to spend some time with Victoria privately. There are things we need to discuss. Marcus looked at me questioningly, and I appreciated that he was letting me make the decision rather than presuming to speak for me. There's nothing we need to discuss privately, I said. Whatever you want to say, you can say in front of my husband. David's jaw tightened at my emphasis on the word husband. Fine, Victoria. I want you to come back to Portland with me. I want us to get married, have the life we always planned. I can provide for you in ways this arrangement never can. This arrangement, Marcus repeated quietly, and I heard the hurt beneath his careful tone. David hired a private investigator to spy on me, I explained. He thinks he understands our marriage based on whatever his investigator reported. Marcus's expression darkened. I see. And what exactly did you discover, Mr. Chen? I know this is a contract marriage designed to satisfy inheritance requirements. I know Victoria needed money, and you needed a wife. I'm not judging, it's actually quite practical. But it's not love, and it's not a real future. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Marcus processing David's words, wondering if they contained truth he'd been too close to recognize. The hurt in his eyes was like a physical blow. You're right about one thing, I said finally. This marriage did begin as a business arrangement. But you're wrong about everything else. I moved to stand beside Marcus, close enough to feel his warmth. This man didn't just offer me money when I was desperate. He offered me respect, trust, and the freedom to become who I was meant to be. He supported my dreams instead of dismissing them, encouraged my ambitions instead of feeling threatened by them. David's expression grew more desperate. Victoria, you're confusing gratitude with love. It's natural to feel attached to someone who helped you when you were at your lowest point. But that's not the same as building a real relationship. You're right again, I said, and saw hope flicker in David's eyes. What Marcus and I have built is so much more than a relationship. It's a partnership, a shared purpose, a life created together from mutual respect and common values. I took Marcus's hand, feeling his fingers close around mine with gentle strength. I'm not grateful to Marcus. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together. I'm not attached to him. I choose him every day, because he's proven himself worthy of that choice. This is insane, David said, his polished facade finally cracking completely. You're throwing away everything we built together for some fantasy life with a stranger. We didn't build anything together, David. You built your career while I provided supporting services. There's a difference. I can give you everything you ever wanted. Financial security, social status, a real future with someone who actually knows you. I already have everything I want. I have meaningful work that I'm passionate about, financial independence I earned through my own efforts, and a partner who sees my success as something to celebrate rather than compete with. Marcus squeezed my hand, and when I looked at him, I saw something beyond relief in his expression. I saw understanding, recognition, and yes, love. The kind that had grown slowly from respect and shared experience, rather than passionate declarations and empty promises. I think it's time for you to leave, Marcus said to David, his voice carrying quiet authority. Victoria, please, just think about what you're giving up. Think about the woman you used to be, the dreams you had before all this happened. I am thinking about her, I replied. I'm thinking about how small she made herself, how she confused accommodation with love, how she was so afraid of being alone, that she accepted being diminished. I'm grateful to her for surviving what you put her through, but I'm not going back to being her. David looked between Marcus and me, finally recognizing that his mission was hopeless. You'll regret this. When the novelty wears off, when the gratitude fades, you'll remember what real love felt like. I know what real love feels like, I said softly. It feels like being seen completely, and accepted fully. It feels like having someone believe in your potential and support your growth. It feels like partnership instead of possession. After David left, Marcus and I stood in the parlor without speaking for several long minutes. The confrontation had forced us to acknowledge truths we'd been dancing around for months, but it had also raised questions about the foundation of our relationship. Was he right? Marcus asked finally, about gratitude versus love. I turned to face him fully. This man who'd become so much more than the stranger I'd married for money. Do you think everything I just said was motivated by gratitude? I think, Marcus said carefully, that our situation is complicated. We didn't choose each other in the traditional way. We were both solving problems when we agreed to marry. Yes, we were, but we chose to build something real from that practical beginning. We chose to support each other's dreams, to share meals and conversations and quiet moments. We chose to create a partnership that means something beyond the original contract. Marcus stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame my face with gentle care. I need you to know something. When I first placed that advertisement, I was looking for someone to fulfill a legal requirement. I expected polite coexistence, nothing more. And now I can't imagine my life without you in it. Not because you solve my inheritance problems, but because you've made this house feel like a home. Because you've brought purpose and joy to work I'd started to see as obligation. Because you've made me remember what it feels like to share dreams with someone who understands their value. Marcus, I'm in love with you, Victoria. Not with the idea of you, not with what you provide, but with who you are. Your passion, your intelligence, your courage in rebuilding your life from nothing. I know our marriage began as an arrangement, but I'd like it to become something real." The words hung between us, weighted with possibility and risk. Our contract had 18 months remaining, but Marcus was offering something that could last much longer, if I was brave enough to accept it. "I love you too," I whispered, the admission feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I love the way you listen when I talk about my work, the way you challenge me to think bigger, the way you've supported my independence while offering true partnership." When Marcus kissed me, it felt like the answer to questions I hadn't known how to ask. This wasn't the desperate passion of people trying to convince themselves they belonged together. This was the deep satisfaction of two people who'd built something solid and true, who'd earned each other's love through daily choices and shared struggles. "So what happens now?" I asked when we finally broke apart. "Now we decide what we want our future to look like." The contract gave us 2 years to determine whether this arrangement would work. I think we have our answer. Over the following weeks, we worked with Thomas Whitfield to dissolve our original marriage contract and plan a new ceremony, one based on love, rather than legal necessity. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that we were planning to marry each other again, this time for all the right reasons. The small ceremony took place in Eleanor's garden on a warm June afternoon, with Rosa as witness and Kat as my maid of honor. This time, when the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Marcus kissed me with real emotion, and I felt the profound satisfaction of a choice made freely, and with full knowledge of its meaning. 3 months later, the Hayes-Blackwood Institute hosted its first annual symposium on private collection conservation. The event drew participants from museums and universities across the country, establishing our organization as a serious player in the field. During my opening remarks, I looked out at an audience of colleagues and peers who'd come to hear my research, and I felt the profound satisfaction of recognition earned through merit, rather than granted through charity. After the symposium, David sent an email congratulating me on my professional success. The message was brief and formal, acknowledging that he'd underestimated my capabilities, and wishing me well in my future endeavors. I deleted it without responding, not out of anger, but because his opinion no longer held any relevance to my life. That evening, Marcus and I sat on our terrace, watching the sunset paint the vineyard in shades of gold and amber. It had become our favorite daily ritual, this quiet time to reflect on the day's work and plan for tomorrow's possibilities. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, echoing the question he'd posed on our first real wedding night. I considered the question seriously, thinking about the path that had led me here. If David hadn't abandoned me, I would never have been desperate enough to answer that marriage advertisement. If I hadn't answered it, I would never have discovered work that fulfilled me completely, or built a life that felt authentically mine. "Only one," I said finally. Marcus raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I regret that I ever thought I needed someone else's approval to determine my own worth. I regret all the years I spent trying to be what other people wanted instead of figuring out who I actually was. But not the path that brought you here. Especially not that. Every terrible thing that happened, every moment of desperation and fear, led me to exactly where I needed to be. I wouldn't change any of it, because changing it would mean losing this." I gestured at the life we'd built together, the thriving institute, the restored mansion filled with art we'd brought back to life, the vineyard producing wines that carried the taste of this particular soil and climate. Most importantly, the partnership we'd forged from the most unlikely beginning. "I used to think that fairy tales were about being rescued," I continued. "Prince Charming sweeping in to save the damsel in distress. But the real fairy tale is learning to rescue yourself, becoming someone strong enough to build the life you actually want, rather than accepting whatever life offers you." Marcus reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers with the easy intimacy of two people who'd chosen each other completely. "So we're both the heroes of this story, and the authors of whatever comes next." As stars emerged over the Pacific, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine filled the air, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me from desperate abandonment to chosen love. The woman who'd signed that first marriage contract for money would barely recognize the person I'd become: confident, accomplished, deeply rooted in work and relationships that nourished, rather than depleted me. David's visit had served an unexpected purpose. His attempt to pull me back into my old life had forced me to articulate the value of my new one, to recognize how completely I'd transformed from victim to victor. His failure to understand the woman I'd become only highlighted how thoroughly I'd succeeded in creating an authentic life. Sometimes the most impossible truths turned out to be the most fundamental ones. The truth that disaster could become opportunity. The truth that survival could become triumph. The truth that arrangements made in desperation could evolve into love stories, written by two people brave enough to choose each other again and again. Our wedding night, the second one, the real one, revealed the impossible truth that had been growing between us all along. We'd never been strangers who'd married for money. We'd been two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, and built something real from the artificial beginning fate had provided. The impossible had become inevitable, and I couldn't wait to see what other miracles we'd create together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.